Olivain dared offer no opposition to this determination, but he followed his master, grumbling. "Go on, go on," said he between his teeth. "Expend your ardour the first day, to-morrow. Instead of journeying 20 leagues, you will travel 10, the day after to-morrow 5, and in 3 days you will be in bed. There you must rest, young people are such braggarts." It was easy to see that Olivain had not been taught in the school of the Planchettes and the Gremids. Rawle really felt tired, but he was desirous of testing his strength, and, brought up in the principles of Athos and certain of having heard him speak 1,000 times of stages of 25 leagues, he did not wish to fall far short of his model, D'Artagnan, that man of iron, who seemed to be made of nerve and muscle only, had struck him with admiration. Therefore, in spite of Olivain's remarks, he continued to urge his steed more and more, and following a pleasant little path leading to a ferry, and which he had been assured shortened the journey by the distance of 1 league, he arrived at the summit of a hill and perceived the river flowing before him. A little troop of men on horseback were waiting on the edge of the stream, ready to embark. Rawle did not doubt this was the gentleman and his escort. He called out to him, but they were too distant to be heard. Then, in spite of the weariness of his beast, he made it gallop, but the rising ground soon deprived him of all sight of the travellers, and when he had again attained a new height, the ferry-boat had left the shore, and was making for the opposite bank. Rawle, seeing that he could not arrive in time to cross the ferry with the travellers, halted to wait for Olivain. At this moment a shriek was heard that seemed to come from the river. Rawle turned toward the side whence the cry had sounded, and shaded his eyes from the glare of the setting sun with his hand. "Olivain," he exclaimed, "what do I see below there?" A second scream, more piercing than the first, now sounded. "Oh, sir," cried Olivain, "the rope which holds the ferry-boat has broken, and the boat is drifting. But what do I see in the water? Something struggling." "Oh, yes," exclaimed Rawle, fixing his glance on one point in the stream, splendidly illumined by the setting sun. "A horse, a rider. They are sinking," cried Olivain in his turn. It was true, and Rawle was convinced that some accident had happened and that a man was drowning. He gave his horse its head, struck his spurs into its sides, and the animal, urged by pain and feeling that he had space open before him, bounded over a kind of paling which enclosed the landing place, and fell into the river, scattering to a distance waves of white froth. "Ah, sir," cried Olivain, "what are you doing? Good God!" Rawle was directing his horse toward the unhappy man in danger. This was, in fact, a custom familiar to him. Having been brought up on the banks of the Loire, he might have been said to have been cradled on its waves. 100 times he had crossed it on horseback, 1,000 times had swum across. Athos, foreseeing the period when he should make a soldier of the Viscount, had inured him to all kinds of arduous undertakings. "Oh, heavens!" continued Olivain, in despair, "what would the Count say if he only saw you now?" "The Count would do as I do," replied Rawle, urging his horse vigorously forward. But I," cried Olivain, pale and disconsolate, rushing about on the shore. "How shall I cross?" "Leap, coward," cried Rawle, swimming on, then addressing the traveller, who was struggling 20 yards in front of him. "Courage, sir," said he, "courage, we are coming to your aid." Olivain advanced, retired, then made his horse rear turned, and then, struck to the core by shame, leaped, as Rawle had done, only repeating, "I am a dead man, we are lost." In the meantime, the ferry-boat had floated away, carried down by the stream, and the shrieks of those whom it contained resounded more and more. A man with grey hair had thrown himself from the boat into the river, and was swimming vigorously toward the person who was drowning, but being obliged to go against the current he advanced but slowly. Roll continued his way, and was visibly gaining ground, but the horse and its rider, of whom he did not lose sight, were evidently sinking. The nostrils of the horse were no longer above water, and the rider, who had lost the reins in struggling, fell with his head back and his arms extended. One moment longer and all would disappear. "Courage!" cried Rawle. "Courage!" "Too late!" murmured the young man. "Too late!" The water closed above his head and stifled his voice. Rawle sprang from his horse, to which he left the charge of its own preservation, and in 3 or 4 strokes was at the gentleman's side. He seized the horse at once by the curb, and raised its head above water. The animal began to breathe again, and, as if he comprehended that they had come to his aid, redoubled his efforts. Rawle at the same time seized one of the young man's hands and placed it on the mane, which it grasped with the tenacity of a drowning man. Thus, sure that the rider would not release his hold, Rawle now only directed his attention to the horse, which he guided to the opposite bank, helping it to cut through the water and encouraging it with words. All at once the horse stumbled against a ridge, and then placed its foot on the sand. "Saved!" exclaimed the man with grey hair, who also touched bottom. "Saved!" mechanically repeated the young gentleman, releasing the mane and sliding from the saddle into Rawle's arms. Rawle was but 10 yards from the shore. There he bore the fainting man, and laying him down upon the grass, unfastened the buttons of his collar and unhooked his dowbelt. A moment later the grey-headed man was beside him. Olivain managed in his turn to land, after crossing himself repeatedly, and the people in the ferryboat guided themselves as well as they were able toward the bank, with the aid of a pole which chanced to be in the boat. Thanks to the attentions of Rawle and the man who accompanied the young gentleman, the colour gradually returned to the pale cheeks of the dying man, who opened his eyes, at first entirely bewildered, but who soon fixed his gaze upon the person who had saved him. "Ah, sir," he exclaimed, "it was you; without you I was a dead man, thrice dead. But one recovers." "Sir, as you perceive," replied Rawle, "and we have but had a little bath." "Oh, sir, what gratitude I feel!" exclaimed the man with grey hair. "Ah, there you are. My good Zorminges, I have given you a great fright, have I not? But it is your own fault. You were my tutor. Why did you not teach me to swim?" "Oh, Monsieur le Comte," replied the old man, "had any misfortune happened to you, I should never have dared to show myself to the marshal again.